For the first time in over 50 years, the federal government is making a fundamental change to its stance on marijuana. A new presidential order is reclassifying the substance, and honestly, it's a move that could reshape medicine and research in America. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what this order means, why it's happening now, and the real-world impact it's going to have, all based on the official announcement. And that quote right there is really key. The entire announcement was framed around this idea of common sense, this notion that policy should actually reflect reality. So let's dive in and see what that common sense approach really looks like in practice. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to walk through 5 key areas. We'll kick things off by looking at what the order actually does. Then we'll dig into the why behind it. We'll see how it's set to just blow the doors open for new research, create new access for seniors, and, just as important, we're going to get real clear on what this order doesn't do. All right, let's get right to the heart of it. What is the fundamental change we're talking about here? Well, it all comes down to one big word: reclassification. So here's the deal. Marijuana is being moved from what's called Schedule 1 down to Schedule 3. And look, this is a massive change because Schedule 1 is the most restrictive category you can get. It's for drugs like heroin that the government says have zero medical value. By shifting it to Schedule 3, where it's sitting alongside things like Tylenol with codeine, the federal government is officially saying for the very first time, okay, this stuff can have legitimate medical uses. So that's the what. Now for the why. Why is this happening right now? Well, the announcement laid out a very specific, very patient-focused reason. And this is where that whole common sense idea really clicks. The speakers kept bringing the conversation back to these specific groups of people. You've got veterans dealing with the wounds of war, seniors who are struggling with chronic pain, cancer patients, and really just anyone who's looking for an alternative to highly addictive opioids. It was all about the human element. And yeah, the veterans' perspective was a huge part of this. The national commander of the American Legion put it really clearly. For way too long, all we've had is anecdotal stories that cannabis helps with things like PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. He argued that this reclassification finally opens the door to do the serious official research we need to prove it and find new ways to treat the people who've served. And here it is. Here's the number that really ties that whole common sense argument together. The announcement pointed to polling that showed 82% of people support this change. The message was pretty obvious. This isn't some radical move. This is just policy finally catching up to where the public has been for a while. Okay, now let's talk about what might be the single biggest thing to come out of this order, what it does for science. See, before this, trying to do medical marijuana research in the US was described as being, well, almost impossible. And this slide, wow, it just lays out the night and day difference. In the before column, you had this heavily restricted process. Researchers literally called it really difficult. Your trials were tiny, maybe a few dozen people, and everybody had to get their supply from 1 or 2 government-approved sources. Now look at the after column. The process is now being called democratized. Any academic institution can potentially run huge trials with hundreds, even thousands of patients using reliable sources. It's a total game changer for the scientific community. What this means is that scientists can finally start getting real answers to the big questions. And hey, it's not just about finding the good stuff. As the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse pointed out, this also opens the door to do critical research on the potential dangers, things like addiction, especially for teenagers. We can finally get a clear scientific picture of both sides of the coin. But this isn't just about research in a lab. The announcement also laid out a brand new, very tangible benefit aimed squarely at millions of older Americans. And this could start as early as next year. So here's the policy in a nutshell. A new model from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, is going to provide an annual allowance of up to $500 for hemp-derived CBD products. I mean, for the 68 million Americans on Medicare, this makes the policy change very real and very personal. And the program itself is designed to be super simple, but also really powerful. A doctor can recommend a CBD product for something like chronic pain. The senior gets it at no cost up to that allowance. And this is the key part, CMS will be collecting data on how it's used and what the health outcomes are. So it's a program built not just to give people access, but to gather that real-world evidence we need to guide policy down the road. All right, finally, let's talk about the boundaries. The speakers were extremely clear about drawing a hard line in the sand. They wanted to make absolutely sure everyone understood what this executive order does not do. And the message couldn't have been more simple or direct. This action is strictly about medical use and research. This is not, in any way, shape, or form, a step toward legalizing marijuana for recreational purposes. And they left zero room for doubt, stating directly, this order does not legalize marijuana, and in no way sanctions its use as a recreational drug. The message was unmistakable. This is about medicine, period, not recreation. So, when you boil it all down, what we're looking at is a really targeted policy shift. This isn't about recreational use. It's about unlocking medical research on a massive scale and creating new treatment options for people like our veterans and seniors. For decades, a door has been locked shut for scientists, and now it's just been thrown wide open. The only question left is, what are they going to find?